Good afternoon and welcome to the South Carolina Public Service Commission. We are here today for a commission briefing, and I will ask Chief Counsel to explain exactly what this is about.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today is Tuesday, February the 3rd. We are here in the Commission's hearing room pursuant to a notice of request for allowable ex parte briefing from the conservation voters of South Carolina. The subject matter of this allowable ex parte briefing is, and I quote, energy affordability and utility transparency, end quote. This is the same subject matter to be discussed in the briefing as was timely noticed by the clerk's office on October 27th, 2025. And this allowable ex parte briefing shall begin at 2 p.m. This is a briefing and not a hearing. The briefing must be conducted in compliance with the provisions of South Carolina Code annotated Section 58-3-260, subsection C. The requirements of the statute are in part that the allowable ex parte be confined to the subject matter that has been noticed. Therefore, I ask the presenters, commissioners, and staff, and all who are present refrain from discussing any matters not related to this specific topic. Second, the statute prohibits any presenter, commissioners, or staff from requesting or giving any commitment, predetermination, or prediction regarding any action by any commissioner as to any ultimate or penultimate issue which either is or is likely to come before the commission. Third, I would ask that the presenters, commissioners, and staff refrain also from referencing any report, article, statute, or documents of any kind that are not included in today's presentation. A copy of any document which is referenced during the presentation or briefing must be provided for inclusion in the record. The record will be certified and all materials will be placed on the DMS. Fourth, if anyone during the course of this briefing exceeds the scope of the briefing or does not comply with or fails to conduct themselves within the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260, it is expected that a contemporaneous objection must be made. And finally, everyone in attendance today in person in the hearing room must sign in or register when you entered. If you did not do so upon entering, please do so before you exit. You were also provided a form at the door to read and sign before leaving the hearing room today. The form that you were provided is for the purpose of attendance and also for the purpose of certifying that the requirements contained in our code section 58-3-260, specifically subsection C, were complied with during this presentation. This means that no commissioner, no person, or commission staff can deviate from the topic of discussion that was noticed in the allowable ex parte briefing, or it will be violating state law for such briefing with the commission. Mr. Chairman, the request and notice of allowable ex parte briefing are all in order and ready to proceed.
Thank you very much. First, for the record, all commissioners are present here in the hearing room. Mr. Adams, I'm going to ask if you'd like to introduce your group, and then I would like to hear from ORS if they have anything to add from that.
Yes, sir. Weston Adams with Nelson Mullins Law Firm, representing conservation voters of South Carolina. I've got Jalen Brooks Neffley with me, and I'll let Jalen introduce the other two witnesses.
Okay, welcome. And from the Office of Regulatory Staff.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thomas Philopoulos and Claire Benge on behalf of the Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you and welcome. All right, Mr. Adams, we're going to turn it over to you.
Yes, sir. So Jalen Brooks Neffley, who's with me, is the energy manager for the conservation voters of South Carolina. She's got a law degree from the University of South Carolina and undergraduate from the College of Charleston. She previously worked for the Coastal Conservation League and the South Carolina Environmental Law Project before joining the conservation voters of South Carolina. Jalen, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Weston. All right, make sure I get this set up here. Good afternoon. My name is Jalen, as Weston said. I'm an energy project manager for conservation voters of South Carolina. We really appreciate the opportunity to be before the Public Service Commission today And I want to thank you, commissioners, for your time and attention this afternoon, and also thank PSC and ORS staff for all of their work in helping us put this briefing together. I have just a few brief remarks to introduce this topic and underscore its importance, and then I'm going to hand things off to our speakers from the Energy Equity Project. CVSC fights to protect South Carolina's air, land, and water, and affordable clean energy is an important part of our mission. The energy system affects air pollution, land use, water use, and resource preservation in our state. And as we advocate to protect the natural world, we also advocate for the people of the state who deserve a clean, affordable, and just energy future. One important part of that is making sure customers have full, transparent information about their electric bills. In my role, I talk about energy issues with people all over the state. And of course, a lot of people talk about high bills. It's often the people with the lower incomes who talk about electric bills in the hundreds of dollars. And that leads to a sort of catch-22, where the people who could benefit most from energy efficiency measures that lower their bills are the ones who can least afford those measures. I also often hear people confused about their electric bills. It's sometimes not clear to them how the money they pay each month is spent or what each charge means. Similarly, people sometimes remark on rate hikes or public comment opportunities that take them by surprise, or public hearings that are difficult for friends or neighbors to participate in. Accessibility and transparency in our electric system are vital for customers, especially in a regulated monopoly system where customers do not choose their provider. Improved communication leads not only to a better informed and less stressful experience for customers, it also empowers them to make choices that lower their energy use. And that lowers individual bills and reduces system needs across the board. But of course, that's just the beginning. Access to full and transparent information can also help decision makers. With better information, they can better implement effective policies to address energy affordability issues at the root, including improving energy efficiency programs, avoiding more and more frequent rate hikes, and addressing costs for new infrastructure being built to serve new load. Some of the examples we'll describe today assist with improved communication and empowerment for customers and better information for decision makers. And that's why I'm excited to introduce our two speakers from the Energy Equity Project. The Energy Equity Project, or EEP, was created and launched by the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability, and the two organizations continue to work as partners. It's EEP's goal to support clean, resilient energy systems, especially in lower-income communities, frontline communities, and communities of color, leading to widespread changes and lasting energy equity. Today we have two speakers from EEP. Director Justin Schott manages the Energy Equity Project. He previously served as Executive Director of Detroit nonprofit EcoWorks for 5 years. He's been involved with many community and utility programs, including the Youth Energy Squad, Home Energy Consultation Program, Coalition to Keep Michigan Warm, Housing, Health, and Heat Waves Project, and Southeast Michigan Stewardship Coalition. He holds a master's degree in natural resources and environment from the University of Michigan and a Bachelor of Science in Natural Resources from Cornell University. We're also joined by Dr. Tony Reams, founder and faculty co-director of EEP. He serves as a professor at the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability and director of the school's Detroit Sustainability Clinic and Urban Energy Justice Lab. He has worked for the U.S. Department of Energy and Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice. He is also a licensed professional engineer and U.S. Army veteran. He holds a PhD in public administration from the University of Kansas, a master's in engineering management from Kansas State University, and Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from North Carolina A&T State University. In this presentation, we're going to provide some background on the state of energy affordability in South Carolina. Then we'll discuss how affordability is tied to issues of utility transparency and successful examples of utility communications in this area. These are policies that can empower customers to improve their energy use and enable decision makers to better address ongoing affordability issues. So once again, thank you for your time this afternoon, and I will hand things off to Justin and Tony.
All right, thank you so much, Jalen. Thank you, commissioners, for the opportunity to be with you today. As a South Carolina native, it is a great honor to talk about this topic that I know is front and center to your minds as well as many across this state and the nation. Energy affordability, energy access. And so today I want to briefly go over our agenda for the conversation. I'll provide a high-level overview of this issue of energy affordability and the idea of energy insecurity. And then we'll talk a little bit about utility considerations. I'll pass it to my colleague, Justin Schott, to talk about what we're learning from across the country and how utilities are actually reporting data so we can address this issue, as well as opportunities for energy bill transparency. And then we'll open it up to you for questions and discussion. So first, we wanted to talk about some of the data that exists to understand this issue, to visualize it, to let you know that this, again, is a national effort to understand energy affordability. And there are two main sources that I want to bring to your attention today. The first is the Pulse Survey, Household Pulse Survey from the U.S. Census Bureau. This began during the COVID pandemic to really try to understand how the pandemic was impacting households across a host of socioeconomic issues, including energy insecurity. And when I talk about energy insecurity, I'm talking about this inability of households to meet their basic energy needs. That is also multidimensional and interrelated with all the things that we've been talking about, whether it's inefficient housing, the inability to heat your home and also afford food, what we call heat or eat, or other issues that are related to household daily costs. And an element of energy insecurity is what's known as energy burden. This is the proportion of a household's income that they spend on energy costs. And the U.S. Department of Energy has a tool called the Low Income Energy Affordability Database, or LEAD tool, that allows you to visualize energy burdens by a host of geographic areas, whether it's a district or a county or a city. And so these two national data sets allow us to do state-based analysis and be able to provide you some of the data on South Carolina that we'll talk about today. And so we know that there's no way to disconnect energy insecurity, energy burdens from overall poverty. In fact, what we see is households that are in energy insecurity who are struggling to pay their energy bills are 50 to 100% more likely to end up in overall poverty. And so when we think about this issue, we kind of disaggregate energy because that's a way for us to begin to address poverty, but just recognize that it's connected to our larger issues around poverty. And a 6% threshold has been placed on understanding energy affordability. So anyone spending less than 6% of their income on energy is considered to have an affordable energy burden, but anything above 6% is considered unaffordable. But we have to look at this across the threshold of household energy or household expenses. And so housing, an affordable housing burden is considered 30% of your income. Transportation, people shouldn't spend more than 15%, more than 15% on food, around 10% on healthcare, and then 30% of your income goes to your other costs. Now, when we think about that 30% of housing, if we take an affordable burden, right, 6% at max, that's still about 20% of that cost. But we know that people are spending far more than the 6%, particularly our lowest income households, some of our communities of color. And so you begin to see that, you know, it can exceed 20% of your income. And so that's a large portion of that housing cost going to energy. And so now households are faced with making other decisions, whether they're going to pay their rent or pay their energy bill. Now, we don't want you to think about energy burden as just a binary, right? You're either at 6% or below or at 6% or above. Energy burden or energy affordability is a spectrum. And so you can see on that bottom chart, going from green to red, we have people anywhere between spending 6% unaffordable up to 30 and 40%. And so we have to understand the set of solutions for people based on where they are across that spectrum. Now, when we come home to South Carolina, what we see is across all income groups, when we average that out, an energy burden is about 2.4%, right? Now remember, 6% is or less is considered affordable. So we could say we have an affordable energy burden here in South Carolina. But again, that's an average. And so what we really see is that 1 in 5 households in South Carolina have an affordable energy bill. So some 22% of South Carolinians are suffering from energy unaffordability. And this isn't just a South Carolina issue. This is a national issue, particularly when it comes to rate increases. We've seen rate increases across the country that are having a disparate impact on those households who are already suffering from high energy burdens or energy insecurity. And you can see just how that kind of breaks out by regions. Here in the South, we've seen some $13.6 billion in rate increases requested by utilities, affecting 41.3 million customers. In the Midwest, where Justin and I live, $4.7 billion in rate increases requesting, affecting 21.6 million customers. And so as we think about burdens, we also have to consider how rate increases are impacting those already overburdened. And there are a host of other challenges that are facing households when we think about this energy affordability issue. Coming here to see snow, which we've been dealing with snow for the past couple months, but we know that snow is increasing people's heating bills during this time, right? That may be astronomical or something that they're not used to. We see huge increases in AC as summers get warmer. Sometimes we see increases of 400% usage from just a 10-degree difference in temperature from 85 to 95 degrees. Utilities are getting huge returns on equity, some $50 billion in excess return on equity. We can drill down into that a little more to understand are they not making investments that they had proposed in their rate increases. Data centers are requiring additional demand and building new infrastructure, as well as new fees that are being placed on utility bills that those who are already struggling to pay just can't afford. Customers are also on the hook for new infrastructure that is needed when it comes to climate events. We've seen in Texas or in Oklahoma, because of Storm Uri, that Oklahomans are paying an additional $2,100 per year based on the changes that need to be made to the grid based on the past storm. In California, the wildfires are adding another $27 billion to customers' bills. And then there are rollbacks in federal assistance. The fluctuations with the federal low-income home energy assistance program, whether it'll be fully funded or partially funded, is also having an impact on the service providers and states that provide energy assistance. So remember, I showed you that 2.4% energy burden in South Carolina. Here you can see how it breaks down across income groups. So folks making more than 400% of the poverty line on the far right-hand side have an energy burden of about 1.5%. But our lower income households, say making 150% or less, are over that 6% threshold. So 8.3% for those with 100 to 150% poverty, and almost 20% for those who are between 0 and 100% poverty. So think about a lot of our senior households who are on fixed income. They're spending a lot of their money on energy. And then here you can see kind of the drivers behind rate increases across the investor-owned utilities, cooperative utilities, or municipal utilities here in the state. Again, a large amount of rate increases requested by our investor-owned utilities relative to the other types of utilities that serve households in the state. And so what are some of the approaches that commissions across the country are doing to address affordability? We're starting to see some commissions propose percentage of income payments. Again, recognizing that kind of threshold of affordability at 6%, trying to create programs that actually keep households below that. Also offer discount credits if you can show that your energy burden is higher than 6%. We've seen some performance-based rate making, saying that utilities should get energy burdens down as they make their rate cases. Also trying to come up with metrics to make sure that energy efficiency dollars are being distributed equitably across different customer classes, and then finding ways to make sure that the growth in demand is actually shared by data centers and not put on the backs of the regular ratepayers. And so one of those thresholds is one that we developed a few years ago called the Energy Efficiency Equity Baseline. This was a recognition that all customers, regardless of their income, were paying into the utilities energy efficiency programs, but they weren't actually taking advantage of those programs because of difficulties applying or not knowing about it. And then we also noticed that many utilities, based on their market rate and their low-income programs, were not even putting in a fair share based on the number of low-income customers they had in their territory. And so the E3B, as we call it, basically says based on the percentage of low-income households you have in your utility territory, that should be a proportion that is also going to your low-income energy efficiency programs as just a floor of how much you should invest. So when we think about energy insecurity, again, taking it from this kind of binary 6% burden to the broader idea of understanding how energy unaffordability impacts households, we use this idea of energy insecurity that has three main components. Being unable to pay your utility bill or paying a partial utility bill, foregoing basic necessities like this heat or eat, or keeping your home at unhealthy temperatures, whether it's too hot or too cold because you either can't pay for it or you can't fix your HVAC equipment, and so your home is too hot or too cold. And so when we look at South Carolina, we find that 24% of households report being unable to pay their energy bill. And again, this comes from that U.S. Census Pulse survey that I mentioned at the beginning. 35% of South Carolinian households are foregoing basic necessities, choosing between energy and medicine, and 21% of households are keeping their homes too hot or too cold. Now, this is experiencing that energy insecurity anytime during the year. But what we have in red is how many households are experiencing it every month, so kind of chronic energy insecurity. And so almost 5% of households say that almost every month they can't afford their energy bill. Nearly 10% say they are foregoing basic necessities to be able to pay energy, and around 6% are saying that they're keeping their homes at unhealthy temperatures. Additionally, 44% of households have experienced at least one energy insecurity risk, and so one of those three. But 10% of households have experienced all three risks. And so again, people may be making decisions to pay their utility bill or pay a portion of their utility bill just to be able to keep their home at a right temperature. But some people are struggling to do any of those. They can't pay their bill, they can't buy their medicine, and they're also living in a too cold or too hot home. And what we know is when people are suffering from energy insecurity and having to make these monthly trade-offs, that they also are likely to face shutoffs. And so this is a chart or table kind of demonstrating over the last several years the percentage of customers that each utility has reported shutting off. And so we can see just in 2024, 6.7% of Dominion customers were shut off, 7.1% of Duke Energy Carolinas, and 11.4% of Duke Energy Progress customers were shut off that year. And this kind of shows you those shutoff rates in a line graph. We see this decline in Dominion, so take a little more data analysis to understand what that is. But you can just see the percentage of households that have been shut off by utility companies, mostly for non-payment. So some states do have protections for shutoffs, particularly seasonally. We see a lot of winter protections for customers, but there are still people who are vulnerable from shutoffs even when protections are in place. Very few states have shutoffs during heat, extreme heat, and you can see some of those that do over on the right-hand side in blue. Cold weather, usually there are dates when states decide that it's inappropriate for utilities to shut people off if they can't pay. In Michigan, because of our sub-zero temperatures, the utility can't shut people off during a certain period. Children, elderly, and those with past due bills are often still vulnerable even when those shutoffs protections exist. And it's most likely that you have to reach out to the utility company to say that you qualify for shutoff protections. They aren't necessarily automatic. So when we did our analysis comparing South Carolina to other states, South Carolina does not have a temperature-based protection in place right now. 15 states in the nation have heat protections. Georgia and Virginia both offer temperature-based protections, but we know that multiple cities here in the state can be above 100 degrees during the summer, and so this, people use a lot of their AC during those extreme temperatures, and that means their bills go up. Again, cold weather has been kind of the primary protection that we've seen across the country. Still no temperature-based protections in the winter for South Carolinians. Virginia can be seen as a model neighbor for some of their temperature protections. And again, it can get cold here, around 22 degrees, and so people crank their heats up. Now, individual protections, a lot of these are around medical conditions, and so if you have a energy-using medical device, you can often request that your utility not shut you off. North Carolina has protections for folks that are classified as elderly or with disabilities. We see some states that have protections for if you have a child in your house, say an elementary school child or someone younger than 12, you can request that you don't get shut off. In our research, we found that South Carolina requires a notice along with a kind of 10-day notice before a person is shut off. States like North Carolina and Virginia and Georgia have 5-day notice. There are 20 states that require in-person notification attempts, so someone actually knocking on your door before they shut you off. 23 states require a phone notification attempt, so calling a customer before you shut them off. And then some other states that we want to highlight, Oregon and Montana, 20-day notice plus written plus phone plus in-person notifications, right? So multiple attempts to reach out to customers before they're shut off. And then my last slide before I pass it over to Justin Schott is to show that, again, there are opportunities that states put forth to do auto enrollment in these protection programs. I mentioned that most times you have to reach out to be qualified for protections. But in certain states like Minnesota with Xcel Energy, based on the census block group that you live in, if it has certain characteristics, because we already have the data on energy burdens, have a lot of census data on, people with disabilities and ages of folks that live in those census tracts, you automatically qualify for energy protection because your community is highly at risk. And so there are opportunities there to kind of use data to make decisions about who to protect. And with that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Justin Schott.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask Dr. Reams a question? Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I was looking at your map. It's slide 24 on the shutoff protections, and you indicated South Carolina did not. So are these protections for any customer during extreme heat or cold?
Yeah, so what we see is they're primarily for regulated utilities. So if you're in an investor-owned utility, most of the public service commissions or some legislatures across the country have put those protections in place. Many of them, if they are required by legislature, then they also apply to people in co-ops and munis. But what we see in most states is just the regulated utilities.
Well, the reason I'm asking about any customer is there are protections for special needs customers, those that have filed a form here in South Carolina.
Okay.
It applies to investor-owned. It applies to municipals, co-ops, Santee Cooper as well, and those they have to provide their written procedures. They're on file with the Office of Regulatory staff.
From their doctor or
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, and
Okay.
it's for special needs customers, and it applies to extreme heat and extreme cold.
Okay. Yeah, the data comes from some colleagues at Indiana University who that probably is not one of their criteria, so that's probably why it was missed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that.
All right. Good afternoon, commissioners. Thanks for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about how transparent reporting can help us to get a better sense for the problem and also give some of the power back to customers who are struggling to understand why they continue to see rising bills and how they might address their own energy insecurities that Dr. Reams was sharing. And I think as we think about safeguarding the public interest and these next few years, and knowing all of those pressures that are coming on to higher energy bills and what people are dealing with, right? There's the old adage that you can't manage what you don't measure. And so that's the starting point that we consider here. And not just for advocates, but I think this goes to customers, this goes to utilities themselves. I think the more information they have there, the better they are to diagnose not just where the problems are, but specific communities that may be harder hit than others, and to really think about the best allocation of resources and how those can benefit the most vulnerable customers. So we'll start with a scan here of what's readily available for folks in South Carolina. So through the Commission website, it's quite easy on a very positive side to access the historic rate increases as well as the returns on equity, both approved and reported. So that's information that people can access with just a click or two to get to this page. As we start to think about what other questions residential customers in particular might have about how their energy bills work, what's contributing to these $700 bills that they may be facing after some serious winter storms, we can start to ask, how do we think about making this less technical for people? How can we do this for people who are maybe not native English speakers? How can we do this in a visual way that really resonates with the way that people are used to dealing with this sort of information? So looking to a first model here in California, there is a bill that is specifically asking utilities to communicate the impacts of certain factors that are especially prevalent in California and how those are impacting people's bills. So things like the costs of wildfire mitigation, right, or liabilities, letting people know as you start to see and experience these bill increases, these are the root causes of that, and just giving people that sense. We see from national surveys, the majority of utility customers feel their energy bills are rising very fast. They're pushing to the edge of affordability, and yet they don't understand all of the charges that they see on a monthly basis. There are many line items that are confusing. So this is one effort to try to clearly communicate, okay, here's what you actually pay for when you're sending your money off to your utility. So we want to know what customers understand and don't understand about their bills. I think the basic power supply and distribution charges, those may make sense, but we know there are a lot of surcharges and other lines that may be confusing to people. We've seen some utilities and commissions that will do a line-by-line explanation. Here's what each of these means, and what you may or may not have control over in your own energy consumption. One of the ways that we can learn about customers' experience with their utilities and their energy bills is from public comments. And there are avenues for people to do that here. but they may not be the most accessible. So this is, again, an area where we've seen other states really make an effort to go hear directly from the people about where their kind of blank spots are in understanding their energy consumption, and getting into a dialogue with people about what their specific challenges are and their lived experience. So coming back to that 2.4% energy burden as an average across South Carolina, we know that doesn't represent that 22%, right, that have unaffordable bills. So how do we hear from them about those specific lived experiences and their struggles with unaffordable bills? So New York has made an effort to solicit more public comment and to get this into the record. They are noting that not everybody responds to bill inserts or even emails, right, and seeing how they can do this through text and promote other communication channels. And then as we see increasing time of use rates or demand response plans, this is an area that's been especially confusing for a lot of customers. Most people don't know offhand what percent of their consumption happens during peak hours, for instance. And so we're seeing a pretty wide cross-section of states that are now offering free calculators based on an individual customer's consumption to say, under each of these different rate plans, here's what you could expect to pay. Also helps people to think about their seasonal charges. If they are looking, they may be able to pay a little bit more in some of the shoulder seasons, but really want to focus on bringing down their peak demand costs during the summertime. So California, Pennsylvania, and Texas are each models that have created these public tools for their customers to use. Shifting gears to reliability, this is more a concern, I think, for Commission staff potentially, and especially the utilities. We know there's some variability in where storm impacts, for instance, happen, but sometimes these are chronic issues with the grid infrastructure itself, and typically we don't get a lot of information. Currently, I think the main information you have is utility-wide, and so it's hard to identify specific communities or even specific circuits that may be experiencing more frequent or longer duration outages than other parts of a service territory. So thinking about some examples again of where there's more information that can come from transparent reporting. Back in our home state in Michigan, the Public Service Commission issues a standardized Excel template to the utilities, and they require reporting both on a monthly basis, but importantly, I think at a census tract scale. So we're really able to disaggregate communities that are experiencing good reliability and good restoration times with those that, again, are chronically struggling with their reliability. Another useful piece here is understanding the causes of the outages. So some of these may be acts of nature, but knowing where there are repeated, for instance, equipment failures can help us understand where investments need to go in the distribution system. So this is a snapshot of that template that's given by MPSC, and you won't be able to read anything on here. I'm happy to take questions on it, but the point is there are a lot of metrics. You can see about 15 metrics across the columns on top of information that each utility is reporting. And then each of the rows represents an individual census tract. So we really have community-specific reliability data. And I think something that's we've heard, at least initially, was utilities being concerned about the effort to get their existing system to report in this format and for everybody to standardize that. The reports back once they got into it where this took something like 8 or 10 hours of staff time to get those configured to a state where they could report automatically on a monthly basis. And some of those metrics that you can get, you can see outage frequency, outage duration. You can segregate whether these account for major event days or not, and also to look at the total minutes of outages by census tract. And then whether this is by utility or by an outside stakeholder, there's an opportunity, again, thinking about accessibility, to visualize these on a map. Here we're looking at reliability times and the percentage of customers that took more than 48 hours to be restored after a certain storm. And this is particularly useful, I think, because 48 hours at that point, customers have lost most of the food in their refrigerator or freezer, probably their medicine that needs to be refrigerated. So we know these are major financial costs to households that are in these orange and red census tracts here. And those are probably places that really need some attention from a reliability standpoint. And on a parallel note, we can learn a lot from disaggregated reporting about disconnections. And again, there are a number of utilities that have started to do this in practice. Here in South Carolina, there is reporting that's available. The monthly frequency is really useful to track seasonal changes or what happens after, for instance, there may be a gap in LIHEAP payments or a particularly hard month in the winter. And these reports are available to the public. They may take a little hunting to find the right path to find a utilities report. We weren't able to find reports that had detail about the arrears, the past due balances that customers had leading up to the shutoff. So some other metrics that are being used in other states, again, getting back to this standardized format in Excel, so other stakeholders are able to do additional analysis may be valuable. Continuing to think about the finest spatial resolution possible, so either at the zip code or the census tract level, helps to understand community disparities. And then thinking about how to make this visually accessible again, so people can see where there may be hotspots, areas that are ripe for additional energy efficiency investments. So here's an example of a public dashboard that's used in Michigan. And at a glance, you can see the trends of disconnections here. You can disaggregate by fuel type as well as by utility. They've also got different tabs for the arrears at the time of balance, the number of customers enrolled in affordability plans. So there's a range of information that people can take in without needing any kind of technical background. I will note with this slide, it's interesting. It looks like it's providing disconnections by month. And in fact, this represents the number of customers who have never been restored. And so it's really important that there's clarity on the specific metric that's being reported and that's known without going through some detailed technical document what's being presented. So again, there's a standardized template here in Michigan. Every utility will translate what it's got in its own system so that it can produce these reports in Excel. Here's an example of what that looks like. And I think there's a balance between collecting more information than we're able to use, or understanding how many customers really have these way overdue balances, more than 90 days. What's the average past due balance at the time of shutoff? Does that differ between low income and non-low income customers? Again, we've got some links to these if you want to look at them in more detail, but just walking you through the volume of information that is collected by the Michigan utilities. Colorado has done something similar, except they've added a geographic component to look at both zip codes and census tracts to see if there are disparities. And you could assess whether there are disparities even among customers that have the same incomes or the same arrears to see if there's some disparate access to energy efficiency or some other responses that may not be equal across different geographies. And another example, you can see this is just an Excel spreadsheet. And so that means that it's something that advocates, other stakeholders, commission staff are able to go in, set up their own graphs over time, do additional data analysis on the work. I think that's all that I had on reporting and data transparency, and we welcome your questions and look forward to discussion.
Thank you very much. It's very informative. Is there any commissioner questions?
Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Reeves, you are the epitome of Aggie pride, considering your record of service, scholarship, and credentials. I'm just trying to figure out, how did all the great institutions in South Carolina miss out on you? You don't have to answer that.
Okay. I won't say that on the record.
He's a Bishopville man, by the way. He grew up in Bishopville.
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, I heard you say he was a South Carolina native, but yeah, he's rocking with the Aggies. Nothing wrong. I love North Carolina A&T. I have some family that went there as well, so
Awesome.
it's all just some good fun with you. Also want to say appreciate your service as well
Thank you.
to our country. I want to dig into your presentation a little bit and talk about South Carolina specifically. I'm going to reference slide 11, energy affordability, and here you discuss the South Carolina weighted average energy burden of 2.4%, and also over 1 in 5 households have unaffordable energy bills. Just wondering, just trying to unpack this slide, did the data show whether or not these households were customers of IOUs or co-ops, or is that information packaged together?
Yeah, so this data comes from the lead tool that I mentioned. It's from the Department of Energy, and it doesn't break it down by utility.
Okay.
It's just looking at basically pulling in different data from the census, and it breaks it down across these income levels, these poverty levels, and so that's where we get the average from.
Understood.
But I think we have some additional data that might allow us to look at both representative state rep districts and other geographic, and we can share that or have shared that with you.
Okay. Is there any information that speaks to the housing stock, these families, whether or not they were in manufactured homes or homes that were in need of repair?
Yes, that's another beautiful set of data that's in the lead tool. You can look at housing characteristics, so whether in multifamily housing, single family housing, manufactured housing. And what we see is, of course, households in manufactured housing also have a higher energy burden, often compared to those in single family and multifamily housing.
Okay. I think this will be my final question. I noticed that you all had a survey of different jurisdictions and programs that exist in other jurisdictions. Is it fair to say that South Carolina's statistics are, I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this, are maybe not as bad as some of the other states in terms of energy affordability or unaffordability? Is there like a ranking?
We did a fact sheet for every state. It's 3 pages that looks at energy burden and disconnections, and the relative rate of increase between residential, commercial, and industrial customers. And I don't remember offhand South Carolina's ranking there, but we could look that up for you.
Okay. And this question is connected to the question I just asked. Do you think, generally speaking, roundup programs or utility-initiated programs to target low-income households or low-income customers could help eliminate the energy burden or energy unaffordability in South Carolina specifically?
And when you say roundup programs, is that like when you go to the store and you round up to donate to a charity? Okay.
That's the way I understand it.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, there's a mix of energy assistance that exists, federal programs, philanthropic programs, and utility programs. If we look at the need, looking at arrearages, people who are behind on their bills, the light heat program from the federal government only serves about 30% of all households that would be eligible for that program, and that difference is not made up by philanthropy or utility programs. And so there is still a huge gap in the amount of assistance that's available versus the need.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think there's a tension between understanding households in crisis and the potential of facing an immediate shutoff. But if you look in hindsight a decade or two later at all of the payments that have been just bill assistance as opposed to energy efficiency dollars, right, those households are still in the same cycle of just they're structurally unable to afford their bills. And so if we think about programs like weatherization, where there's a 20% or so average savings per household, they cost more upfront, but I think that's the real path, so that households that have these 9, 10, 15% energy burdens can get down to an affordable level. And in the long term, I think that ends up being cheaper for other ratepayers as well.
Thank you, gentlemen. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Is there any further commissioner questions? Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Chair Powers. Mr. Reams, no, Mr. Schott, you just ended by talking about the impact to all ratepayers. And I'm limited in what I can ask you all, and based on what you've said thus far. But so I'm really just going to make a statement, and if there's something that naturally comes from it, please offer it. And that is, as you listened, I listened thinking, what can we do? What can I do? But I also listened with this filter of where is the cost and the benefit associated with. You've talked about a need, but we ultimately end up thinking about and hearing data related to proposed solutions and what those costs are and what those costs are for every ratepayer.
Yes.
So I really just offer that as an observation, and I thank you for being here. And if there's an easy answer that fits within what you've presented to us, please add it.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner Williams. I think that's a very good observation. One of the graphics that we have on our fact sheets is looking at the overall surplus. So we know if the energy burden for the average South Carolinian is 2.4%, then the average customer, right, could add some percentage and still have an affordable bill to support additional affordability programs. And so in many states, that surplus is something like 10 times more than the gap of those unaffordable bills. And so that, I think, is a source of potential hope that we know in aggregate the resources are there. And many of the impacts, if we hear concerns about the additional costs of affordability programs, the ratepayers, perhaps not in utility rates themselves, but they will pay for it in other public spheres, right? So if we have people enter overall energy poverty, if we have people using public emergency room services, right, these just get funded through our taxes, but it's both a very expensive and a very inhumane way to do it as opposed to tackling the problem up front.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Commissioner Caston.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Yeah, thanks. I was looking at slide 12. You talked about energy burden. In slide 12, the investment per regions. And the energy burden, is that electric and gas? And relative to this particular chart here, is that investment?
Yes, this report on slide 12 with the regional rate increases, the number of customers impacted includes gas. I believe on the order of 80 or 90% of the rate increases here are from the electric sector.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Further commissioner questions? Let me ask one, and either of you can answer. The poverty level, apparently the last few years, it's gone up. Can anybody tell me what it is now that this study's based on? What poverty level?
The annual threshold in dollars.
The number, yes.
Yeah, I believe we are at around $16,000 for a one-person household. And yeah, I used to cite it's got to be in the low 20s, I think, for a household of 3. Those are my benchmarks for 100% of FPL.
Okay. And those are fairly low numbers, aren't they, considering the cost of everything?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any further commissioner questions? Thank you all very much for being here. Does ORS have anything they'd like to add or comment on?
No, Chair, nothing else to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists, for being here today. And Mr. Adams, thank you for bringing them to us. It's been very informative and a lot
Thank
of
you, Mr.
stuff to
Chairman.
consider.
Thank you.
And we do appreciate it. If there's nothing further, then we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
for your time.
commissioners.
Yeah, thank you all.